Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're diving into something pretty out there, a concept that began in France called Operation La Catapulte.
Ah, ye
You know, the one where they use catapults to
Yeah.
send people across the English Channel?
Yeah,
Over the past year, it's really evolved
it
from
has.
a controversial immigration policy to something with global consequences and some really strange cultural shifts.
What's interesting is how this one idea has kind of morphed and grown
Yeah.
and impacted so many things, international relations technology, even France's self-image. It's fascinating.
So we've got a ton of sources here, news articles, think tank reports, even some leaked government memos. It's a lot
It is.
to take in. So let's break it down.
Okay.
What were they actually trying to achieve at the start with Operation La Catapulte?
Well, from what I've gathered, the French government presented it as like a three-pronged approach to managing what they consider problems along their coast.
Okay.
Undocumented immigrants, homeless people, and people with minor criminal records.
Hmm.
Those were who they were initially targeting.
Makes sense.
The goal was to reduce the pressure on their social services, increase coastal security, and obviously control immigration.
So how did this catapult thing actually work in practice? Were
Right.
they just like randomly launching people into the English Channel?
Not exactly.
Right.
They developed these special catapults and positioned them along the coast.
Uh-huh.
And everyone being launched was given a made in France inflatable safety jacket.
Okay.
The idea was that the jackets would inflate when they hit the water and cushion the landing.
Hold on. So they were basically just launching people into the water
Yeah.
with inflatable jackets and hoping for the best.
Well, they claimed there was participant consent.
Hmm.
But you have to wonder about how genuine that consent was given the situation. And the testing of those jackets wasn't exactly as thorough as you might hope.
That sounds a little sketchy. Did the British government have any say in this?
There were discussions with the British government, but from what we know, it wasn't really a collaborative effort at first. France basically presented it as something they were already doing a solution to their problems,
Hmm.
with the understanding that the UK would just have to handle whoever ended up on their shores.
I can't imagine that went over very well.
Not particularly, but that's where things get really interesting in just 1 year.
Yeah.
Operation La Catapulte went global.
Right.
This transnational catapult alliance was formed. It's pretty mind-blowing when you think about the tension there was at the beginning.
Wait, are you saying the British were on board with the whole catapult idea?
Not only on board, but they actually teamed up with France to take it to a whole new level.
Yeah.
And by this point, Scotland had become independent,
Right.
which added a new layer of complexity.
For sure.
They developed these advanced catapults called Catapults Superfuls,
Okay.
which could launch people much farther all the way to Scotland.
So the UK, dealing with an independent Scotland, decides to partner up with France and launch people into Scotland's territory.
Yes. And it wasn't just a political move. There were major technological advancements because of this partnership. The UK brought their engineering expertise to the table, which resulted in catapults with longer range and more power.
Wow.
It just goes to show how even a controversial policy like this can lead to unexpected technological innovation.
So we've gone from a local immigration policy to international alliances and technological advancement. Where does it go from there?
Well, let's just say the world was watching, and some world leaders were taking notes, especially Donald Trump.
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting. Donald Trump, the former U.S. president.
The one and only, he became very interested in Operation La Catapulte.
Oh.
He saw it as a way to deal with his own concerns about the border, and he placed an order for 45,000 French catapults
45,000.
to be used along the U.S.-Mexico border.
Wow.
The American version was called Operation Mago Launch.
Operation Mega Launch. It does have a certain ring to it, but I'm sure it caused a lot of controversy.
It was a complete firestorm. Human rights groups, international organizations, even some people in his own administration condemned it. But despite all the backlash, it showed how much influence the French initiative had. Operation La Catapulte was no longer just a strange thing happening in Europe. It was becoming a potential model for how countries might deal with complex issues, which is a bit of a scary thought.
So France is now a global exporter of catapult-based solutions.
It's actually even more complicated than that. France saw an opportunity and started marketing a simpler, more affordable version of their catapults to developing nations.
Really?
They called these lance-pierres, which basically means slingshots, but they were a lot more powerful than a child's toy.
Okay.
Their target market was countries dealing with immigration smuggling and border disputes.
So France is positioning itself as a global leader in, well, let's call it kinetic population management.
Basically, yes, they're offering what seems like a quick and easy answer to complex problems, but of course there are huge ethical concerns that come with that.
All of this is already so wild, but I know there's more to unpack. What happened in France itself? Did Operation Le Catapulte change French society?
It did in some pretty unexpected ways. One of the most surprising things was a citizen survey that found widespread joy among the French population, particularly in seeing people they considered undesirable being catapulted away. They titled the report, "The Joy of Separation," which I think sums it up pretty well.
Wow, that's a lot to process.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense that people want solutions to problems that affect their communities, but to celebrate the removal of people like this, it feels really unsettling.
It does raise some important questions about how societies function and how people tend to look for simple solutions to complex problems.
Right.
Are we too quick to get rid of those we see as different or problematic? Does this reflect some deeper issue in society?
Okay, I need a minute to absorb all of this. We've gone from immigration policy to international alliances, technological advancements, Donald Trump, and now this strange social shift within France itself.
And we're only just getting started. Remember that cultural festival in Calais I mentioned, the one centered around Operation La Catapulte?
Oh, right, the Festival de la Catapulte. That's actually a thing.
It is, and it's as bizarre and fascinating as it sounds. We'll get into that and more after a quick break. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been talking about the political and technological side of Operation La Catapulte.
Right.
But now let's focus on the impact it's had on people.
Yeah, that's important.
Yeah.
It's easy to get caught up in all the geopolitics and the strangeness of it,
Right.
but we can't forget that real people's lives are being affected.
And not just those being launched, but the communities on both sides of the channel, the
Yeah.
ones sending and the ones receiving these people.
We've got interviews, personal stories, even some leaked reports that give us a glimpse into what these people are going through. So where should we begin?
Let's start with the people who've actually been catapulted. They've been called the flying pioneers.
Flying pioneers, huh?
And as you might imagine, their experiences have been all over the place, from terrifying to completely surreal.
I can't even imagine what it would be like to be strapped into this huge machine,
Right.
given an inflatable jacket that you're not even sure will work, and then launched into the air with no guarantee of a safe landing.
It's a lot to process.
It is, and the reasons for being in France in the first place are also varied.
Yeah.
Some were running from danger or war-seeking asylum.
Right.
Others were looking for work, a better life.
Mm,
And some were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, caught up in this whole policy.
it's a mixed bag.
There's this one story that really stuck with me about Ahmed, a Syrian refugee.
Yeah.
He said that being launched from the catapult was both the scariest and most exhilarating experience of his life.
Wow.
He talked about feeling a strange sense of freedom as he was flying through the air,
Interesting.
like he was detached from all the hardship he had gone through.
That feeling of surrender, of letting go and finding some kind of freedom in that seems to be a common theme in a lot of the stories. It's almost like a coping mechanism, a way to deal with the trauma.
But we can't forget that this isn't some kind of adventure. We have reports of people getting hurt, panicked landings, people disappearing into the channel, never to be found.
That's the reality.
The French government keeps saying this is a safe and humane approach, but that's hard to believe when you hear what people have actually gone through.
They point to the low number of deaths, the fact that they provide food and water before launch, and the improvements they're making to safety features. But when you hear the stories of those who've experienced it, you can see a huge gap between what they're saying and what's actually happening.
It's also worth mentioning that this policy has had a ripple effect on the communities along the French coast.
Yes, definitely.
Places that used to be lively, full of activity, have become almost ghost towns.
The constant presence of the catapults, the security personnel, the processing centers,
Yeah.
it's created an atmosphere of tension, a sense that these communities have been completely changed.
We're seeing a divide in how people feel about it. Some see Operation La Catapulte as something that had to be done,
Right.
a way to restore order and safety. They talk about less crime, less strain on local services, a feeling that their borders are finally under control.
Yeah. Those are valid points.
But others feel like their community has lost its soul,
Yeah.
like there's been a loss of compassion and empathy.
I can see that.
They see those catapults as symbols of fear of division, of a society turning its back on those who need help.
It's a complex issue.
And then there's the impact on tourism.
Yeah.
Calais used to be known for its beauty and its proximity to England.
Right.
But now,
The catapults aren't the kind of attraction that brings in tourists.
not exactly.
Mm.
But a new kind of tourism has popped up, what you might call catapult voyeurism.
Catapult voyeurism.
These are people mostly from other parts of Europe who come to Calais specifically to watch the launches.
Wow.
It's become a spectacle almost, like people are morbidly curious.
It raises some uncomfortable questions about whether it's okay to profit from the suffering of others.
Yeah.
Is it right to turn a humanitarian crisis into entertainment?
It's a tough question, but it also shows how we as humans try to make sense of and even make money from difficult situations.
That's true.
The French government has even started offering catapult tourism packages
Really?
with guided tours, souvenir shops, even catapult simulators.
That's unbelievable.
It's been met with a lot of criticism internationally, but it shows this strange mix of wanting to solve a problem and wanting to profit from it at the same time.
It's a contradiction, for sure.
It's also fascinating to think about the people who actually design, build, and operate these catapults.
Yeah.
The engineers, the technicians, the safety inspectors.
Right.
They're not the ones making the policies, they're just doing their jobs.
Mm-hmm.
But their work has these massive consequences.
Some of them just focus on the technical aspects.
Yeah.
Try not to think about the human side of it.
I can understand that.
But others struggle with the ethics, wondering if they're part of something harmful.
We talked to one engineer, anonymously of course, who said he felt like he was building a weapon, a tool of oppression.
Wow.
He tried to speak up about his concerns, but no one listened, or he was even threatened.
That's awful.
It reminds us that even in these crazy situations, there are ordinary people dealing with moral dilemmas trapped in systems that don't reward speaking out.
It's a good point.
So far, we've mainly been talking about the French side of things.
Yeah.
But what about the people on the receiving end of all this? What's the impact been on England and Scotland?
That's where things get even more complicated. Imagine a small coastal town, completely unprepared, suddenly having to deal with a huge influx of people.
Right.
Many injured, disoriented, speaking a language they don't understand.
Logistics alone must be overwhelming.
They are finding shelter, providing medical care, dealing with language barriers, cultural differences.
It's a huge task.
And all of this is happening while they're also dealing with political outrage.
Yeah.
The British and Scottish governments have been very vocal in condemning Operation Catapulte, calling it a violation of international law, a dangerous and reckless policy.
I bet.
But those condemnations haven't stopped the launches. So these communities are left to deal with the consequences, forced to adjust to this new reality.
Some have responded with incredible kindness.
They have.
We see volunteer groups forming shelters being set up, people offering language classes, opening their homes to strangers.
It's heartwarming to see.
Doctors working overtime, teachers going above and beyond to help these newcomers.
It's really inspiring. It shows the resilience of the human spirit, the ability to be kind, even in the face of such a crazy situation.
But that goodwill is being tested.
It is. Resources are stretched, thin tensions are rising, and there's a growing resentment towards the French government.
Yeah.
And unfortunately towards the flying pioneers themselves.
I can understand that these communities are being asked to deal with a problem. They didn't create a problem that was forced upon them.
And that frustration is coming out in different ways.
Right.
Discrimination, harassment, even violence. It's a dark side to this story, a reminder that even the most tolerant societies can become fearful and prejudiced when pushed too far.
Operation Catapulte has also strained relations between France, England, and Scotland.
It has.
We're seeing diplomatic standoffs, trade disputes, even threats of military action.
It's a clear sign that even in our connected world, national interests often come before humanitarian concerns.
So we've looked at the impact on those being launched. The French communities, those who build the catapults, and now those on the receiving end.
It's a complex web of consequences, each one adding to the bigger picture of how Operation Catapulte is affecting people.
And the story, unfortunately, doesn't end there, because this technology that was created to control people is now being used to tackle another global problem: waste.
That's right. We're about to enter the messy world of Operation Volante.
Operation Volante.
The latest chapter in the saga, and perhaps the most controversial one yet.
Welcome back to the deep dive.
Very.
We've been through the ups and downs of Operation Catapulte, from its start as a way to control population to its effects on international relations and the unsettling social changes it's brought about. And now we're at a chapter that's both bold and, Well, let's just say it has a certain smell.
Yeah, Operation Merde Volante, or Operation Flying Shit, as it translates, is a shift from launching people to launching trash.
Operation Flying Shit.
It's France's big experiment in dealing with its growing landfill problem, and it's created a whole new set of arguments and diplomatic issues.
We're talking about getting rid of waste
Yeah.
on a massive scale, not just throwing a few empty bottles in the bin.
Right.
Huge compressed blocks of trash, they call them paquets de merde, are being catapulted into Scotland.
It's quite a sight.
The French government says this is a new and innovative way to be environmentally sustainable, a way to reduce their dependence on landfills. They're presenting it as an example for other countries that are struggling with waste management.
I see.
But let's be real, choosing Scotland as the landing spot for all that garbage without asking them hasn't exactly made them happy.
To say the least, and to handle this unusual cargo, they've had to make some major upgrades to their catapult technology.
Tell me more about these merde catapults. They sound like something out of a cartoon.
Well, they're much bigger and stronger than the ones used for people. They have to be able to handle the weight and size of these trash blocks and launch them with enough force to get them across the English Channel.
I can only imagine the engineering that went into that. We're talking aerodynamics, structural integrity, and of course the issue of keeping the smell contained.
There are rumors that they're using biodegradable casings for the trash blocks to lessen the environmental impact on Scotland. But the French government has been very quiet about the technical details.
As secretive as ever, but regardless of the specifics, this program has gotten a global response, both good and bad.
On the one hand, environmental groups and some countries are praising France for their daring approach to waste management. It's a dramatic solution to a problem that affects the whole world.
It definitely gets attention, but is it really the right way to do things? Scotland isn't exactly rolling out the welcome mat for all this trash.
They're outraged. They've called it environmental aggression, a violation of their independence, a total disregard for international environmental agreements.
And they have every right to be angry. France might be reducing its own landfills, but it's just moving the problem and the potential environmental damage to Scotland.
True.
It raises questions about who's responsible and the impact on a country that didn't create the waste in the first place.
Right.
There are economic effects, too. France saves money on waste management, while Scotland is stuck with the cost of cleaning up and getting rid of all this garbage.
It's a small-scale version of the global waste trade, where developed countries often ship their trash to less developed countries, passing the environmental problems on to them.
We see this reflected in public opinion in France. There's a mix of pride in their innovative approach, but also concern about the diplomatic fallout and the ethical implications.
Makes sense.
Nobody wants to be the bad guy, especially when it comes to the environment. But in Scotland, there's widespread anger protests, petitions, boycotts of French products. It's a full-blown backlash.
It sounds intense.
So Operation Merde Volante has made relations even worse, creating a real diplomatic crisis.
In response, France, like they did with England, has proposed a waste treaty with Scotland.
Oh.
The offer includes money for waste disposal, technological help for managing waste, and joint research into more sustainable solutions.
It's an attempt to smooth things over, presenting it as a team effort, instead of a one-sided act of, well, let's call it trash diplomacy.
It is.
But whether Scotland will accept this offer is anyone's guess. Their trust has been broken, and the environmental and economic burdens are heavy.
Yeah.
So we've come full circle from launching people to launching trash. Operation Catapulte has taken us on a wild ride.
It has.
One that highlights the inventiveness, the ethical dilemmas, and the unforeseen outcomes of big solutions.
It makes us think about innovation and responsibility, national interests versus global cooperation, and the unexpected consequences of our actions.
As we wrap up this deep dive into Operation Catapulte, we're left with a final question. In our search for answers to the challenges humanity faces, where do we draw the line? When does a new idea become reckless? And who ends up carrying the weight of our choices?
These are important questions that go beyond this particular story.
They do.
They're questions that we as a global community need to face head-on as we navigate an increasingly complex and interconnected world.